Officially, good morning. My name is Matheson Sharp. I work for Save the Children on the IDEAL activity in the KM and communications team. And today we're going to be learning and discussing 508 compliance and branding and marketing. But before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to introduce ourselves and would like to take this moment to hand it over to my colleagues Beatrice and Bethany for a quick hello. Over to you.
Thanks, Matheson. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Welcome. Glad you could join us this morning. My name is Bethany. I'm the lead associate for the small grants team on IDEAL at Save the Children. So I've talked with most of you through email, but it's nice to see you face to face. And yeah, excited you're here. I'll hand it over to my colleague, Beatrice.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. I'm Beatrice Scheuermann. I'm the Small Grants Advisor on the IDEAL project at SAVE. And glad to see you all. Glad to have you all here. And I hope that this proves to be a helpful and informative session. Back to you, Matheson.
Well, thank you. All right. So I just thought that we can maybe start with introducing everyone else on the call. And so if you could just come off mute and share your name, location, and your organization. And then if applicable, give us a little bit about your understanding of 508 compliance and branding and marketing, and maybe an example of what you're working on or a communications challenge that you faced that really brought you to this meeting. So maybe I'll start with Ardi, since you were the first into the meeting today.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Ardi Mezine. I'm from Pristina, Kosovo, and I work for a consultancy firm called International Advisory Products and Systems, which is a consultancy firm based in the US. We provide monitoring evaluation services for clients in the humanitarian aid and international development sector. At the moment, among other services and expertise, we also do knowledge management and research studies. And recently, we've engaged in a project funded by IDEAL USAID to conduct photo voice training for participants in Syria and Syria and Venezuela. My understanding of the 508 compliance branding and marking is, we make it accessible to people with just first of all make it clear as to who's producing the document, what activity it comes from, who's funding the activity, and also make it accessible to people with disabilities and make it easier to read, understand, and follow.
Brilliant, brilliant, thanks. And I'm just going to call on people. Kara, if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, thanks.
Okay, great. Yes, my name is Kara Rabunariel. I am a strategic learning lead for the Maharu Resilience Food Security Activity, which is funded by USAID and the BHA, or Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. I work with Catholic Relief Services, and I'm based here in Antananarivo, Madagascar. My understanding of the 508 compliance is a bit limited, if I'm going to be honest. I'm a researcher by training, program manager, kind of monitoring and evaluation specialist, integrated food security. So compliance might not be my strong point. So I'm looking to learn quite a bit. And what we're currently working on, we are received a sub-award funding through IDEAL and USAID on the qualitative monitoring program. And we are currently implementing that in our zones in southern Madagascar, where we're currently doing the RIFSA activity. communication standpoint, I would guess from us here, it would probably be internet reliability, also power. But in terms of communications with you all, no challenges there. It's just the operation environment working in Madagascar, I would say, but great to be here and thank you all.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing. And it sounds like you're on the right call. So hopefully we can make this useful and actionable. Mike, if you'd like to go next.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for hosting the call. My name is Mike. I'm the Executive Director of Ripple Effect US. I'm based in Washington, DC. Our programs are based in rural Africa, mainly East Africa. And our organization empowers smallholder farmers to become self-sufficient. We are funded by IDEAL to do some research on the sustainability of volunteer farmer training programs. Specifically, we are doing research on sustainability of projects that we've implemented in Kenya and Uganda. And as it pertains to 508 compliance, I should say, I am here to learn a lot about it. Don't know much about the compliance, but certainly want to make sure that our branding and communications are as inclusive as possible. And look forward to learning and hearing from everyone.
Brilliant, thank you. And over to you, Sophie.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Sophie, and I work for Causal Design, which is a research organization based in the US, although I personally am based in Kenya. So we do a lot of various types of monitoring and evaluation work for sort of several RIFSs across the globe. So we recently been working on a grant called PIA, which is involved in developing a sort of qualitative monitoring module with a political economy analysis sort of approach. And we've also done work with some RIFSs in Ethiopia and in Madagascar. So hi to Kara. And when I think of 508 compliance, it's one of the requirements for our deliverables. I haven't done any of it in the past really myself, so I'm kind of representing for Causal Design, and I'm glad this is going to be recorded so I can share it with some of my other colleagues as well. Because the way I see it, it's sort of a last stage. It's done at the last, maybe I'm wrong. It's kind of one of those things done at the last stage with formatting and stuff, but I'm interested to hear if there's ways to kind of incorporate it earlier in the process.
Fantastic, fantastic. And actually that proves to be a kind of a perfect transition, because we do want to make this this meeting as helpful as possible, and really something that you can come away with maybe some tips and tricks and ways of just thinking about all this. Yes, please feel free to share this with colleagues and anybody within your sphere of influence. But yeah, without further ado, I'd like to just get started and dive right in. So as part of the KM Comms team, we spend our days identifying knowledge gaps, sharing knowledge, and even at times creating knowledge that we can then share. But this knowledge sharing depends a lot on the exchange of information. And as I think many people have already touched on, inaccessible information leaves behind members of our community. So we're going to discuss accessibility as it pertains to 508 compliance, and then spend some time discussing branding and marking later on. So I look forward to this sharing session. So we all know how important equity and inclusion are, and the necessity to center these principles, not just in our content, but also in the form and the function of our content. And that brings us really nicely to 508 compliance. 508 compliance is a shorthand of how we refer to the process of making our products accessible. The term comes from Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is a US government regulation that states that programs and activities funded by the US federal government must be made accessible. And Section 508 focuses on the digital aspect, so making digital products accessible. And so you may be wondering, what does that mean for us? Essentially, it means that all of our reports, briefs, PowerPoint presentations, online learning, social media, any product must be accessible for everybody. We need to be able to ensure that screen readers or screen reading technology can make sense of our documents so that people with low vision can see information in color and people with limited mobility can navigate our online resources. So with that said, there are some really easy steps that we can all take to make this process more efficient and ultimately more inclusive. So I want to kick it off with talking about alt text. So we all love photos, charts, graphics. They communicate so much, which is why we say, the old adage, a photo is worth 1,000 words. But of course, not everyone can see the images we add. Many people use screen reading technology, which reads aloud or translates to Braille, all document text and descriptions of any images in a document or web page. Those image descriptions are called alternative text, or alt text for short. So take a look at this beautiful painting. Not sure, you may have seen it before. So there are just so many ways that you can describe it. Now I'd like to show some of the auto-generated alternate text. And as you can imagine, this information is not really helpful, especially if that's all that you receive about the image. It's really almost as bad as not receiving any information. It's definitely not an image of a person and a strawberry. So while we don't need to use 1,000 words to communicate what we're seeing, we do need to describe the image so that everyone receives the key information and can use that description to understand what they would be looking at or what is being displayed. And this is true for more than just photos. If you're including a graph, a chart, an infographic, or a table, you also need to consider the alt text. And this really kind of goes to what Kara was saying about when you're starting to think about the 508 compliance. As technical experts or the people that are creating these documents, you know your products best and the context and the information better than anyone. And so it's really helpful for you to take a moment to add your own alt text where you can, just so that we have really the best description and the best explanation of what's being displayed. If someone comes in after the fact, say for example me, and I'm looking at a report and I've read the report, but I don't have all the contextual information. I don't necessarily have all of the correct terminology to accurately describe what's being communicated. And that's really a great opportunity for you to include your take on that. Adding alt text is quite simple. If you're working in a Microsoft Office application, such as Microsoft Word, you can add alt text by simply right-clicking on an image, selecting the Format button, and then clicking on the Layout and Properties icon, which is a square with some directional arrows in the center, and then just type in the description. It's really that easy, as you can see from the slide on screen. So I wanted to take a moment to, while we're still fresh of mind, and have a quick little activity. We're going to take 90 seconds and come up with some of our own alt text. So I'm going to invite you to take a look at this image to the right and write down your own alt text based on how you would describe it. And really think about the words you would use to describe it to someone who can't see the image. Consider what important elements you would highlight. Is there context that's important? So I'm going to just share some sound. I'm going to play some music. We're going to count down from 90 seconds, and then we will just share. So I invite you all to start writing your alt text, and I will play some music. Okay. So, how did that go? Do we have any volunteers? If you'd like to perhaps pop your description into the chat, or anyone who'd like to come off mute. I do see Audie. You included served pancakes with maple syrup. Katie says a large stack of pancakes on a plate with syrup being poured over it. Good. Any other takers? Sophie, a stack of 12 pancakes with butter and syrup being poured over them. In the foreground, there is a fork. In the background, there is sliced butter and a jar of flour. Sophie, I think you've been looking at my notes. Yeah, so I think those are three great options to get us started. All three communicate what is being shown in the picture, but at different levels of detail. What I had put together was a stack of 12 pancakes on a white plate. On top of the stack of pancakes is a pat of butter, and syrup is being poured over the top and pooling in the plate. There is a jar of flour and a plate of butter in the background and a fork in the foreground. So pretty close to really what Sophie wrote, just sharing that with you now. But the idea is to go beyond the really obvious. This is a man smiling. This is a picture of, or not a picture, this is a garden. Really getting into the various elements of the picture that may be more descriptive and really help paint a picture. So if we're describing a garden, maybe describe the type of plants or crops that are being grown. Is there a fence? Is the climate dry, or is it a lush green image? Just trying to, again, add a couple more context clues around the image so that people who can't see it understand what's being shown. So nice, well done, everyone. Next, we want to move to discuss color contrast. All of our organizations have some really beautiful brand colors, but colors should really never be used on their own to understand information. So let's take a look at an example. At the bottom of this slide, you see a table. And just based on assumptions, you would guess that the green bar means complete, the yellow means in progress, and the red is incomplete from a status standpoint. But I also imagine that you can guess that this isn't compliant on its own. But let's look at why. To begin with, color is not read by screen reading technology. So no matter which way the screen reader reads those bars in the first table, right to left, up or down, etc., the audience would have no information from inside the table. There's no text, so it wouldn't be able to read anything. Second is that color is not experienced the same for everyone. Some people can see slightly different color spectrums. Some people can see certain colors and not other colors. And if they can't see a specific hue, they would be left in without the information that would be required. So the lesson here is to always add a text element when you are accompanying color to convey information. So if you are trying to communicate sentiment, color alone cannot be used. But if you attach some kind of a text element to it, then we're starting to get toward being compliant. Also important is that when you do use color, we need to make sure that there's enough color contrast for information to be read easily. There are minimum color contrast standards that we need to meet, and this goes for all different graphic elements. And so now I'd like to show you some of these differences. So looking at these color examples, we've actually seen that it fails all of the tests for regular text, large text, and graphic components. The reason is that the background color does not provide enough of a contrast with the white font. So the lighter blue background really just kind of doesn't have enough contrast. It conflicts with the font, and it almost gives a little bit of a glare if you're looking at the screen. Here is an example of color contrast that is passing for all font sizes. So it's a darker background with the white font, which, as I mentioned, just creates enough contrast so that you can see where the font is. So while you're thinking about color contrast at the beginning of putting together a document or a report, it helps you having to go back and recreate graphics or charts that have not been using colors that are compliant. But you're not on your own, fortunately. There are certain tools such as WebAIM or Adobe Color that you can use to see if there's enough contrast between colors. As you can see on this slide, here's an example of the interface on WebAIM, which is an online free tool that you can use to test out different color combinations to see if it's compliant. There is a link to WebAIM in the 508 compliance two-pager that I shared yesterday, but I can also follow up after this chat and with a link to that. But it's WebAIM is online. If you have the full Adobe suite, Adobe Color does the same test for you. So that's important to keep in mind. Next, I want to talk to you about tables and table properties. If your document includes tables, there are important considerations to take to be 508 compliant and help screen readers understand and read tables in the proper order. And I'm going to share a couple little quick steps that we can take to make these documents compliant. So our first step is going to be captions. Captions function essentially as a header for a table and help users understand the bigger picture and how it relates to the context of the page. So generally, we place captions above a table so that most screen readers will announce that caption before moving on to the table content. Just like alt text, you can add a caption by right-clicking on the table and selecting Insert Caption. Alt text, just as with images, tables need alt text too. So alt text explains the information contained in the table and should be descriptive to allow an understanding of the content without going line by line. This is because some people using screen readers, just as we skim a report, may choose not to read the full table. Tables may be lengthy or contain a lot of information, and by reading the alt text, the user would be able to tell if it's worth reading each line or if they want to just skip to the next section. So the alt text is just important to allow that understanding without having to go line by line. You really want to just give the context and an overview of the content. It's also really important to have repeating header rows. The idea is that including a repeating header row, which means if a table is pushed from one page to the next, that table would still have the rows identifying what all of the content for each row means. It's important, as I mentioned, because some users may expand the size of text or the zoom on a page, which may shift content further down. And the goal is to ensure that content does not appear without proper identification and context. So it's a really important feature that we have to do for all tables. Even if it's just a really simple table that maybe has 3 columns and 2 rows. Again, just from an accessibility standpoint, it's really important. Again, if you're working within the Microsoft Office suite, you can do this very simply by highlighting the header row, so just dragging across the top, and then going to the Layout tab and clicking Repeat Header Rows. If you are struggling to make header rows repeat, which can happen even if you're doing everything that you think you followed all the right steps, there's a couple things to consider to ensure that you have enabled that correctly. The first is to open up table properties under the Table tab and make sure that the text wrapping is set to around or is not set to around. That just messes with the kind of the formatting. And also just making sure that you're only selecting that top row. If you click on the whole table, Word will think that the entire table is the header row, and it will just, it won't be any help at all. So really just making sure that you've selected that top row is important, and then also giving some considerations to the text wrapping elements. But that's really only if you're think that you've done it and it's not repeating the header rows. Just 2 quick tips that I always like to share with people. We learned about color contrast earlier as we were just discussing that, but tables must also have color coding and formatting that adhere to the color contrast standards that we discussed earlier. So making sure that colors used for alternating rows, headers, and the font color provide enough contrast is really important to meet those standards. So again, just going in and using one of those color contrast checkers is really important. Or if you've already identified compliant colors, you can just go ahead and apply those and use them. One thing I do want to mention, especially as we're talking about colors and branding, we understand that organizations have their own brand colors. And unfortunately, some of those may not be color compliant just based on, they weren't designed from a 508 standpoint. And at Ideal, we understand that and we make an exception there. So we're not going to ask you to change your organization's brand colors to make them darker or offer enough color contrast. That's an exception that we can make. Our request is just if there's an opportunity where you are adding colors that are not within your brand specific colors, to make sure that those colors are specific. So if you are just creating a table to make it look nice and it's not using your colors, those colors would need to be color compliant, but within your own color scheme, your color wheel palette, we understand, and we're not going to make you go back and have your whole organization change their colors. So just one comment I wanted to share about that. So that's a really brief overview of 508 compliance. It's something that we think about every day, and it's an aspect that's used throughout all of our work. But I really do want to hit that not only is it required, but it is the inclusive and right thing to do to make these products that you've put all that work into accessible to all people. So I'd love to open up the floor to any questions or points that I can clarify. Please just feel free to come off mute or type something into the chat. I'd be happy to discuss before we move on to the branding and marketing component.
Hi, this is Sophie. I've just got a quick question on the alt text.
Yes.
So on your slide, you mentioned don't include the phrase photo of or image of in the alt text. So I was just wondering why that was.
Yeah, great question. It really comes down to style. So when we tag on the back end the elements within a page. An image we will tag as an image, a table we will tag as a table. So a screen reader would already have identified that this is an image. So it's really just from a redundant standpoint. So always saying a photo of or a table of, it's really just communicating something that's already been identified, and so it's not necessary. The only real exception is if the image has, say, a table within it. So you would, like, if the image is of a table, which is kind of bad practice, but sometimes we run across that where someone screenshots a table and puts it in, then you would say a table and then explain the table. But that's really a very specific case kind of situation. But yeah, in 2 words, it's really just redundancy, unnecessary.
Great, thank you.
Of course. And I realized that wasn't 2 words. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you for the presentation. When we do the tables, is it necessary that we make every row a different color? I mean, in the example table that you shared, you had some rows in white and then the other rows were in like light blue.
Yeah.
Is it important to do that, or are we also okay to include all rows in white?
Yeah, no, that's a great question also. No, there's absolutely no requirement to do alternating colors. That's really just stylistically. In fact, not including the colors really does make it more accessible, and you don't have to worry about making sure you have color contrast compliant rows. We do know that a lot of people do like to have that distinction between rows, and it just a lot of graphic designers will add it in because it makes it pop more. But that's really just from an aesthetics standpoint. No need or requirement to do alternating colors.
Thank you.
Of course.
I also have another question
Sure.
about the alt text for pictures.
Mhm.
Is it necessary that we include the alt text using the insert caption option, or can we also include them as text boxes? Because sometimes it's just easier to include them as text boxes because then you can move them around however you want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the alt text would need to be assigned in the alt text section. So if you click on an image and go to format, there's a tab for alt text. And that's just so that when a screen reader comes across this image, it can identify it. If it doesn't have any alt text in it, a screen reader would just, identify here's an image and then move on. And even if it goes to a caption or text right below it, it's not always intuitive to the user that caption is describing the image above. So yeah, just the move here is to include the description as alt text. The captions are more for identifying the photo below it, but you wouldn't put alt text into a caption. The alt text is also a way of just kind of hiding that content for people who don't need to see it, rather than having text boxes all over, and maybe they can be a bit lengthy, really just messing with the formatting of the page. The alt text is just a nice way of including it attached to the photo, but without adding to the content on the page. Does that answer the question?
So you're saying that if I were to include a text box via Word, the screen reader might not read it at the right time, or?
No, I'm sorry. So perhaps I misspoke. A text box and a caption is different from alternate text. So alternate text is text that's embedded within the photo that is separate from any kind of caption or text box beneath the image. So you have to attach alt text to the image so that when a screen reader comes across that photo, it can identify what's being shown via the alt text. The caption is just is not
Okay.
necessarily a
Okay.
descriptor for. I mean, Yes, it is a descriptor of the image, but that's more from your design standpoint. The alt text is a requirement for images under 508 compliance.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Mike, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thanks for the very helpful presentation
Mhm.
and the Q&A, and it's been very insightful. So I just, this may be a slightly dumb question.
Oh, never.
I'll preface it by saying that. But I'm wondering what the array of I would say communications and marketing materials that we need to be aware of 508 compliance. And I'm assuming the answer is any and everything, but how does that, for the most part, we're talking about reports, but are we also talking about presentations? Are we also what's the array of comms and marketing materials that we do need to be aware of?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So it kind of comes down to anything that's public facing. If it is going to be shared with the general public, whether it is a presentation or a report or a brief or really just a promotional photo collage, they would all need to be 508 compliant. If it's something that you're just working on internally within your organization, it's a nice to have. It's good, always good to be inclusive and make things accessible, but you're not bound by law. The way I also like to think of it, and this may be of help, is anything that we put on our website, the FSN network, must be 508 compliant. Whether it is an accompanying presentation, a PowerPoint presentation that we're uploading that just so that people can have it because they attended a webinar, or if it is a more formalized report. Anything that gets posted on our website has to be 508 compliant, just as kind of the bare minimum.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Just before we move on to the next section, do we have any other questions that I can address at this time? There will be time at the end as well for more questions. Okay, well, if anyone changes their mind or something comes up, please feel free to either type something into the chat or just raise your hand or interject. Great. So now I'd like to turn our attention to branding and marketing considerations for as it pertains to USAID, and really largely speaking, the USAID logo. So one key way to again be compliant with this is to make sure that all brand materials meet the USAID branding and marketing regulations. So because IDEAL is funded by USAID and BHA, we just have to be conscious of these regulations. It is, as I mentioned, it's a policy, it's a regulation to identify that it's a USAID funded project. And the logo is seen as a representation of the fact that it is coming from funding from the American people. So one key way to be compliant is including the disclaimer. The disclaimer is really important language that has to be included on all products, and it shows that the products and materials are not produced or endorsed by USAID, but are funded by USAID. And so one kind of quick way is once the IDEAL and USAID logo shows up on a document, there has to be a disclaimer. You don't have to include the disclaimer on every page. It can be included on the first or the last page, but it must be included on any document that is created with US government funding. The next component of the branding and marketing I wanted to discuss is the logo. And this is really where we'll spend the most of this section discussing. As I mentioned, it's a graphic representation of USAID and has really specific guidance around its usage, the style, and regulations around the placement. So the USAID logo comes in 3 distinct styles. There's a 2-color logo, a black only logo, and a white logo. You can use them interchangeably, although the white logo can really only be used providing it's legible, so you wouldn't put it on a white background, but it is very helpful if you do want to include the USAID logo over a photo, for example, as part of a branded material or a slide. The white logo shows up well against a busier background, whereas the black or the 2-color can sometimes get lost within that. Also, one item I did want to highlight, there's a former version of this USAID logo that was the full 2-color but had a black handshake as opposed to a blue handshake. That is now an outdated logo and it can't be used. So if you are refreshing brand materials, or if perhaps you downloaded logos several years ago, just something to keep an eye out for. If the handshake is not blue, it's no longer allowed to be used as it's outdated. And then branding, co-branding and placement is also pretty important. So when included with partner grantee or grantee logos, the USAID logo must be placed in a position of prominence. As you can see from this graphic on screen, it should be in the left corner with the other logos following to the right. Everything must be either the same height or smaller than the USAID logo. Yeah, we generally align to the top of the logo as opposed to the bottom of it. Depending on the shape or the design of the partner logo, it can dip below the USAID logo, but not above, which can be a little bit tricky. I know sometimes when we're setting up these documents, you don't have too much space to play around with fitting all the logos in. So just keeping in mind these regulations when you are setting that up can save you some time down the road. And that kind of brings us to spacing, which is really the last and most important element. We have to keep a minimum area within and surrounding the logo, the type mark, or the seal that is clear of typography and other graphics. So that's to say we can't put logos right up against the USAID logo. It essentially translates to that minimum clear space that is equal to the U of used in the logo. So you can use that to kind of gauge whether you've added enough space. As you can see from the graphic with the ideal logo, the U's in the corner demonstrate that white space that must be kept clear. And so, yeah, just something to keep in mind when you are setting those up. And then lastly, because IDEAL is a BHA funded activity, the IDEAL logo can never be included or used without being accompanied by the USAID logo. So it's kind of a simple, if you see one, the other has to be there. So if you've included USAID, we have to have IDEAL and vice versa. But that's really specific to our project as a small grantee. In other aspects, if you're receiving funding from USAID independent of IDEAL, that is not necessary, obviously. I also included just a couple thoughts on placement. I mentioned earlier about using the white logo on pictures. As you can see on the right-hand side, we place the white logo at the top in the blue space so that it stands out a little bit more. The color two-tone at the bottom where the wheat is. It's a little too busy, so I would suggest placing it in a different location. And then lastly, just one really important consideration is that we're not permitted to change the colors of the USAID logo under any circumstances. So even if all the logos on your document have been changed to grayscale to meet some kind of a design element or request, the USAID logo cannot be changed to gray. It has to be one of the 3 color options that we identified. And the great thing is that you can download all of those from USAID's website. The presentation I sent everybody yesterday, you can open that up and follow these links to download files, do a little bit more reading if you so choose on the regulation and policy. And then there's also a really useful graphic standards manual that I included a link to that dives it even deeper on placement and usage and typeface. But really, I felt that the logo placement, usage, and the disclaimer are really the most important aspects from a branding and marketing standpoint for the work that we're doing. So that's my presentation on branding and marketing. Curious if there's any questions that came up from that. I know I went through that a little bit quickly, so if there's anything you'd like me to expand on, please let me know.
Hi, sorry, I have a question.
Of course.
I hope it's not a dumb one.
No.
So you said we can place the USAID logo on the left and then have Ideal on the right. Is it okay if we include our organization's logo on the same row? So
Yes.
like on the far right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there we go. So this that I just pulled up on screen is a good example of what exactly how you can lay it out. So if we had USAID and instead of Goldman Sachs, it was Ideal, and then it could follow any of the other grantees or partners involved in it. Yeah, all on the same row is perfectly fine.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Well, I do see that we're coming up to time. So I do want to just take the opportunity to thank you all for joining me and listening to me kind of ramble on. I hope it was somewhat coherent. But that's the world of 508 compliance and branding and marketing. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions. I just put my contact information on screen, but I also hope that you would already have my email address. It's never an imposition. If you have a question or want to discuss something further, please just drop me a note and we can tackle it together. We're really here to be a helpful resource, and just want to be as useful as possible. So please do keep that in mind. We will also make this recording available to you all. So if you would like to share that with team members or other people within your sphere, please go ahead and do that. Forward that 508 compliance cheat sheet or checklist, as well as a presentation. That's not a problem in the slightest. And just let us know if you have any questions at any time. But again, thank you all for your time and hope you have a lovely rest of the day and close to the week.